Evans, I think we can start. So,
Okay, we're just
Okay.
gonna then. Hi. Okay, we can just start the presentation then, right? Okay, perfect. So hi everyone, my name is Fajr Khan, and this is Anya. She will be doing this workshop with me. If Anya, you can go to the next slide. This workshop will be about gender equality, environment, and sustainability. But first, I'm just going to explain a bit about Anya and myself. So we are the co-founders and co-presidents of Girl Up Pakistan. This is an organization and actually in a chapter of the United Nations Girl Up campaign. We're the first chapter in all of Pakistan. And our goal is to empower women and also to advocate for gender equality. We do this through various initiatives, such as collaborating with MUN Impact on the 100K Deeds Challenge, but we also do our own initiatives, such as volunteering at psychiatric hospitals and trauma centers for individuals and young women and girls who are also who have experienced trauma too. And we also have an Instagram page where we just post informative content about gender equality, feminism, and intersectionality. So that's essentially our organization. If you want to go to the next slide, Anya. So in this workshop, we're going to start with a bit of an icebreaker and a Jamboard as well, just to get some of our ideas flowing and a little bit of an introduction. Then we're actually going to go to the content in terms of gender equality, environment, and sustainability. And lastly, we're going to be doing a Kahoot and just going over some final questions.
Okay, so we wanted to make this workshop as interactive and engaging as possible. So I guess we just thought like to start off with a little icebreaker, just so that everyone gets a little comfortable with everything. So we have one question, and if everyone could answer, that would be great. So if you could eat one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be? So for me, I guess that would be something like ice cream. What about you, Fudger?
For me, it would definitely be mac and cheese. I love cheese and macaroni as well. So you guys can also just enter it in the chat. It's perfectly fine. So Jen says rice, Rosemary said pizza. You guys can also unmute yourselves if you'd like. I think that's possible. And otherwise, you can just go ahead and send it in the chat. Rita said ice cream as well. Ear said salmon, cheese pizza, noodles, spaghetti. It's fine if you don't know. Anything is okay. Meat, that's a very general, but interesting. I like meat as well. So I think everybody answered Anya, so we can move on.
Yeah, so we're gonna start off with doing like a little brainstorm. Just before we get into the presentation, we wanna know what comes to your mind when you think gender, environment, and sustainability. So we're gonna send the link to a Jamboard, and if you guys could just put in your answers in there, that would be great.
So like you can just add sticky notes to the slide, just any words or terms or sentences or even questions that you have regarding environment, gender, and sustainability.
And then I guess when everyone's done, they should just like type that into the chat so that we know and we can move on.
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone wants to add anything else, they can still always do that through a sticky note, but we're also just going to move on to the actual content of the presentation. Okay, so first we're going to start by discussing how environmental issues disproportionately affect women. The United Nations recorded in 2018 that 80% of all individuals who are displaced by climate change are in fact women. BBC stated that women's traditional roles as caregivers, as well as roles as providers of supplies, including food and fuel, make them more vulnerable during natural disasters resulting from climate change, such as flooding and drought. An example of this is in Central Africa. There is Lake Chad, which is a primary source of water for the communities there. However, due to the overuse of the lake, as well as persistent droughts and other consequences from climate change, the lake continues to shrink and essentially disappear. Now, this has particularly impacted women in nomadic indigenous groups. For example, in the dry season, men usually go to the town and leave the women to take care of the community, the children, the elders. And aside from having to walk extremely far distances to collect the water because the lake continues to shrink and then becomes further and further distanced from the houses and the communities, the long dry seasons also mean that women have to work harder to support their communities. They are disproportionately burdened by the effects of climate change. And also, this is seen also on a global scale, where women have been shown as having a higher likelihood of suffering from poverty than their male counterparts, as well as having less socioeconomic and financial independence and power. This disproportionately poor socioeconomic status of women around the world makes it more challenging for them to recover after natural disasters that impact their communities, their financial status, and their homes. This is particularly true for disasters that affect jobs, housing, and infrastructure, such as floods, earthquakes, and hurricanes. And research has also shown that cases of violence against women, including sexual assault, do increase after natural disasters and when they're occurring as well. Another example of this is Hurricane Katrina, which was in the US in 2005 in Louisiana. There, African American women were among the worst affected from the hurricane. This is largely because of the higher poverty rates among women in Louisiana, where over 50% of all of the poor families in the city were in fact single mothers. This also highlights the intersectionality of gender equality, where it's not only an issue of gender with, for example, males and females, but it's also more complex than that when you bring into identities such as sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and then there's added layers of complexity because of that. Emergency shelters are also often inadequately equipped to support women's needs. For example, after Hurricane Katrina, the Superdome, where most people went for shelter and evacuation, it didn't have enough sanitary pads for the displaced women who needed accommodation there. So these are just some examples of some of the gender inequities that are seen when natural disasters hit communities. So yeah, you can go on to the next slide. So women can also it's not only that women are more affected from climate change because of these gendered inequities, but they can also contribute to sustainability and environmental change in a very unique way, which makes it important that they are properly represented in these discussions about policy and climate change. Because of its disproportionate impact, climate change is also important to women. However, women are also important to climate change is essentially this notion that is going around. And in order to ensure that that the world's efforts to limit climate change are going to succeed, women need to be full and equal part of the solution. So, for example, I think all of you have heard of the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change, which highlights the importance of gender equality, which highlights the importance of international collaboration to work towards mitigating climate change. However, it also highlights the importance of gender equality and the importance of women play in combating climate change and ensuring a sustainable future. The preamble of the agreement calls for gender equality and women's empowerment. There are also sections throughout the agreement that call upon countries to implement gendered approaches to mitigating and responding to climate change.
So this year, UN Women hosted the Generation Equality Forum. And one of the main points that they talked about was the fact that women are less likely to own land than men. So in Latin America, women own less than 20% of the land. Data shows that if they were to have the same access as men, agricultural production would increase considerably. Women play a key role in the management, conservation, exploitation, and utilization of natural resources as consumers and educators, despite having serious limitations in access and control of these resources. Surveys even show that women tend to be more sustainable consumers. Women are more likely to recycle, more likely to buy organic food and eco-labeled products, and place a higher value on energy-efficient transport. They make more ethical consumer choices, paying closer attention to issues including child labor and sustainable livelihoods, and are likely to buy socially labeled goods such as fair trade. For example, in Sweden, statistics indicate that the group most concerned about green purchasing includes some of the poorest members of society, single mothers. Overall, many studies indicate that gender inequality brings higher economic costs and leads to social inequalities and environmental degradation around the world. So some statistics indicating that natural disasters accelerated by climate change do not affect all individuals equally are as follows. In the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Oxfam International reported that the surviving men outnumbered the surviving women by almost 3-to-1 in Sri Lanka, India, and Indonesia. Potential causes of this were identified as men being more likely to be able to swim, as well as women losing evacuation time looking for children and family members. In another report with research spanning over 20 years, it was found that catastrophic events lowered women's life expectancy to a greater extent than men's. Either more women were being killed by disasters or they were dying at younger ages. Notably, in countries where women had more socioeconomic power, this disparity reduced. So that just comes to show that because of these social norms that we have in societies that still follow traditional conjugal roles that are based in patriarchy and sexism, based on that, women are unable to contribute to the conversation regarding climate change. I mean, women do make up about half of the world's population. So if you take that into account, that means that half of the individuals are unable, on Earth are unable to even fight for climate change or, be able to be part of that discussion. So, I mean, if we begin to include women into the conversation, as Fudger said, we would be able to make greater change rather than just having that lay primarily on the side of men.
Yeah, so also what from Anya said and what I discussed before, it's very clear that women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate change and by the consequences of climate change, particularly these natural disasters that occur. Now, the United Nations has highlighted the need for these gender-sensitive responses to the consequences of climate change. However, as Anya said, there's a lack of representation of women and girls in these policy bodies and these climate change advocacy forums. It's very difficult to implement all of these gendered systematic approaches to climate change and to natural disasters when the average representation of women in global and national climate change negotiating bodies is less than 30%. That's an extremely low amount considering that women and girls do make up about 50% of the population, as Anya said. Now, a quote from the environmental scientist Diana Liverman was that women are often not involved in the decisions made about the responses to climate change, so the money ends up going to the men rather than the women. So instead of looking at the factors that actually impact women disproportionately as a result of these climate change issues and consequences, most of the money and the resources goes to different policies and different implementations that favor men over women. So this is just another example of how not having a voice in these policymaking bodies impacts women in these climate change consequences in these natural disasters. And the Paris Agreement is a critical step forward in combating climate change because it acknowledges the need of a gendered approach to climate change and mitigating the issue. However, unless countries completely implement it and actually take a step towards implementing gendered responses to the effects of climate change, and they ensure equal female representation on policy bodies, women will continue to be disproportionately affected by these natural disasters. As Anya said, considering women make up about half of the human population, it is extremely important that they participate in these major policy decisions. So that is just the main part of the content of our presentation. I think we want to go back to the Jamboard to see if anyone added anything, and maybe we can add some more stuff considering now we've gone over the presentation and the content.
So I think this was like what everyone thought of when they heard the words gender, sustainability, and environment before the presentation. So maybe now if you guys could, in another color, maybe green or something, put down your thoughts and your ideas after you've heard the presentation on what those three terms mean to you now. So Fudger, do you want to go over some of the points? I think a lot of them are really interesting. We can kind of get a conversation going.
Sure. I thought a really interesting one was here in the corner where it said gender roles shouldn't be this harmful. For example, the 2004 tsunami, women should also be equally prioritized in learning how to swim, and men should also look for family members in incidents. So also, since me and Anya are also from Pakistan, where a lot of women and girls actually don't know how to swim here, is something I've definitely noticed in comparison to men here. So for example, when floods occur, obviously floods are not as big of an issue in Pakistan, but in other countries like the Netherlands, floods are a big deal. And if women don't know how to swim or like are less educated in that sense in comparison to men, it can obviously impact their life expectancy, how safe they are during these, natural disasters. And also the point they made about how men should also participate in looking for family members and looking for their children and their relatives, where it's not just put on the women, that they're not just put in that position where they also have to endanger themselves or they cannot get evacuation. So I thought that was really interesting too. If anyone wants to add anything or talk about one of the specific points, I think they have the ability to unmute. Otherwise you can send it on the chat too, and we can discuss that. But Anya, if you want to point out one of the other ones.
I mean, I think actually that one you pointed out was so interesting because in Pakistan, in South Asia, maybe even, girls don't play sports. That's just the norm. I mean, there's also this whole culture that if a girl is on her period, she cannot go out and play a sport. That was something that would happen at my old school, which I thought was completely ridiculous. So I think because of these little things, that are societally ingrained, it kind of prevents women from being a productive member of society as whole. You know, the not representing women in sports, girls in sports. I mean, we think of that as something that's not linked to climate change. It's not linked to, you know, this bigger global issue. It's just like, you know, a little thing. But
Yeah.
when you put everything into account, if there was a flood and then a girl doesn't know how to swim, obviously she is going to be the one to suffer in comparison to a boy. And
Deeper
another
question. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. And another point which I thought was really interesting was gender being a spectrum, because to imagine girls not being represented as much, individuals of the LGBT community are completely not represented, especially in
Yeah.
South Asian communities, in, you know, even in some African parts of the world. So
Mhm.
when it comes to the issue of gender equality and climate change, how do we even have those members contribute to this discussion if we cannot look to them as equals and individuals and give them those equal opportunities?
Mhm. I also thought a really interesting one was impacting those who are least represented. That's kind of what we're talking about as well. And the importance of, you know, diversity in everything and everywhere we do, because these policy bodies have such a big impact and so much power. You need to make sure that everyone is represented, and that there is enough diversity in those settings, whether it be in the media, whether it be in policy, you know, governing bodies and policy and change makers. It's so incredibly important, not only for, you know, on a gender perspective of men and women, but also other genders, gender minorities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, you know, just making sure like it's really showing how important diversity really is in this day and age in all aspects of, like, you know, our life, not only in media, but also in issues like climate change, where, you know, people don't usually think of climate change, for example, being a gendered issue, but in reality, almost everything is a gendered issue, and it's an issue of, you know, unequal access and inequity too. So that's really interesting too. Yeah, if you see any other interesting ones to talk about, then go ahead.
I mean, if we have these primarily male policymakers making rules or whatever legislations that inherently affect impoverished people, which are more likely, as we said, to be women, then we're directly having males affecting women. So we do have, you know, there's been a lot of talk about some countries not acknowledging climate change or not doing enough to prevent that. And as a result of that, what happens is there's more carbon emissions going out, more fossil fuels being burned, and more poor women being affected as a result of that. So yeah, I think it is time now to involve women in the discussion and to really just shed a light on that as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And also even like the intersectionality thing that we mentioned, not only intersectional in terms of ethnicity and race, but also socioeconomic status, because obviously there's women and there's men in these higher income communities that where they don't really see the direct consequences of climate change as much as, you know, these communities, like, for example, who need to get their water supply directly from Lake Chad, which is slowly disappearing because of the actions of these more wealthy communities. So it's really important to also understand how women and men and all other gender identities in these low-income communities are more impacted and really get the brunt and are at the forefront of kind of our actions too, because, you know, like with capitalism and everything, we're really at the forefront of causing, you know, accelerating climate change and accelerating global warming, when they actually end up getting the brunt of it, you know, because they're also more dependent on nature, and they live in these kind of communities too. So intersectionality is really important, not only between gender and climate change, but just in gender equality as a whole. And that's, I think, luckily something that in the past few decades we've been highlighting more than just, you know, one type of feminism or one type of gender equality. Let me look a bit. If you want to say anything else, Anya, then you can go ahead. Yeah, someone said like a woman discovered the cure for cancer. It's definitely important to have everyone involved in, like, you know, idea making, because diversity is what breeds like diversity of idea, diversity of thought, and what allows this accumulation of, you know, novel ideas, novel approaches. So that's why just diversity is important as a whole. I think that's like a good message you're getting out of this. I think we can move on because we've analyzed most of them and talked about them. If anyone wants to still add anything or say anything in the chat, you can go ahead. But we actually have a Kahoot as well that we wanted to go through. And that's something fun and interactive we can do. So are you gonna display it on your screen or share it through the chat?
I will do both. So
okay, perfect. Yeah. So you guys can just join the Kahoot, and then it's just going to be some questions about what we discussed in the presentation that we can answer and see how it goes. So guys, just go type on your browser kahoot.it, like IT, and then you can just enter the game pin and enter your name and join. And I'll send a link as well, just in case someone can't. You can just enter the pin here. If anyone is still trying to join, let us know in the chat. Otherwise, in like a few seconds, we're going to go ahead and start.
I lost my connection, but I just went back. Thank you.
No problem. I think we can get started. No one else said that they need to join, so we can go ahead. Anya, you can go to the next. I'll read out the question too. Women of color have a higher likelihood of being adversely affected by climate change. True or false? Yeah, so the answer was true. They are disproportionately affected because of the intersectionality we discussed before. And like with Hurt and Katrina as well, African American women were disproportionately affected. Yeah, next. Okay, in the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, why were there more male survivors than female survivors? Yeah, so the correct answer was that women were more likely to know how to swim than men were more likely to know how to swim than women, and therefore had higher survival rates. How much land do Latin American women own? 15, 12, 30, or 20%? Yeah, so it was 20%. What does the 2015, I believe, Paris Agreement on climate change highlight? Social inequalities and gender roles prevent women from participating in the climate conversation. Is this true or false? So yeah, it is true that because of social inequalities, they have less representation and therefore are not able to participate in the conversation. So this is fill in the blank. Studies indicate that gender inequality brings blank economic costs and leads to social inequalities. No, so the answer was higher economic costs. Fill in the blank. Women are blank, meant to recycle, use eco-friendly products, and make ethical consumer choices.
I clicked the wrong one.
It's okay. It's just like a little game, so it's not an issue. But yeah, it was more likely then. And this is also true or false. After Hurricane Katrina, the Superdome Evacuation Center had enough sanitary pads for displaced women. True or false? Yeah, so the answer was false. And this is another example of how in evacuation plans, women are disproportionately affected and usually are not the focus of these evacuation plans as well. So the average representation of women in global and national climate negotiating bodies is less than blank percent. Yeah, so it was 30%. So third place, we have 194. Second place, we have Anisha. And first place, We have Valir. I think that's how the name's pronounced. But yeah, good job, guys. 10 out of 10 and 8 out of 10. Very impressive. So glad you guys paid attention. I think that's all from that end. Yeah, congrats. So that's all of our content in the presentation we wanted to do. So now we just wanted to see if anyone had any questions or concerns or wanted any clarification. And you can just unmute or otherwise use the chat and let us know. Yeah, go ahead, Giovanna. You can, I think, yeah.
So I just have a question about the representation of women. So like, there are some committees in the United Nations that want to empower women, like the CSW, the Commission of Status of Women. Do you think that they will be able to bring up women to attend UN conferences, and then that could like make women more present in media, and then countries can make women more present in their own commissions?
Can you repeat the last part that you said? I didn't completely hear it.
Yeah, so do you think that women being more present in the United Nations would bring countries to make women more empowered?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the UN is like this governing body as well, an international one as well. And even like, on a local scale in MUNs, even like, impact and quality in the United Nations, incorporating women in these, model or simulated forms of policymaking, and then the actual United Nations where they make the policies. That's a huge part of, empowerment, because if women don't have the ability to make these decisions, to make these policies and implement them, then how can women in their communities be uplifted and be more empowered? So definitely representation anywhere is extremely important. Anya, do you want to add anything, or?
I think that was great.
Yeah. Did you want to say something else, Giovanna? Sorry, I cut you off.
Sorry, it's just a question. So I really find it very interesting that you have this organization. Do you host like frequent workshops for Girls Up organization?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of what you said?
Do you host frequent workshops for the Girls Up organization?
Anya, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so we actually do. If you want, we can give you our Instagram handle and you can find us on Instagram.
I'll send it on the chat, or you
Yeah,
can do it.
that would be great. I really want to congratulate you all. You too.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
It's
it.
very interesting.
Yeah, of course. If anyone else has any other questions, you can raise your hand. Yes, Anisha?
Hi there. So my question is, what can we as students do to increase representation in our communities and sort of work on a smaller scale?
Yeah, so like I'll answer, then Anya can answer as well after me. I think just advocacy is a huge part of it. For example, Anya and I also saw this issue of, gender inequity, especially as two girls who are living in Pakistan, where there's like all of these issues of femicide and domestic violence and abuse against women, and women are extremely stifled here, actually. So we saw this issue, and with a government that cannot always advocate for what we believe in because of also the lack of representation of women in these government positions, we decided to kind of do our own advocacy and empowerment. So that's why we also started Girl Up as an organization, where we have a team of, I think, 14 to 15 executive members, and we also have some guys there too, which is also shows the importance of both women and males and boys and everyone across the gender spectrum being involved in this advocacy and campaigning for gender equality. So I think by volunteering in your community at women's shelters, and also advocating in your like at a local scale, your own families, your classmates, your peers, people you work with, I think that's the first step and can be really catalytic if you educate or empower one person and they empower other people through these different campaigns, Girl Up campaigns, or just even having conversations, difficult conversations sometimes about gender inequality, about how women and girls are usually oppressed or stifled. So I think at a local scale, just having these very difficult discussions and organizing these projects, these workshops can make a huge difference too. And that would definitely be a first step. So yeah, Anya, you can go on.
I mean, also just kind of joining these kinds of organizations like Girl Up Campaign, He for She, these UN branched youth organizations can really help you. It gives you a broader insight into the issues that, are brought up upon on social media, on online forums. I mean, that's what Fudger and I did. We started the first chapter of Girl Up Campaign in our whole country, actually. So doing things like that, it gives you a sense of leadership. It makes you feel like you're part of a broader community, and it really does help bring about change in any way possible, whether that be online, in person, through volunteering initiative, and yeah.
Oh,
So-
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question as well. I also sent the Instagram link, just so you can click on that and also see our Instagram page through that. If anyone else has any other questions, you can raise your hand, or anything maybe you want to contribute as well. It doesn't have to be a question. Giovanna, do you have a question, or did you just forget to lower your hand?
No, actually, I have a question. So,
Oh yeah,
is gender inequality also a big issue, like it's in Indonesia, issue in Africa?
is it an issue in Africa? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I think Anya actually lived in Ghana, so maybe you want to answer this one.
So were you asking about the issue of gender equality in Africa?
Yes.
Okay, so actually, I worked closely with UNFPA in Ghana, and it is a huge issue, the issue of gender. There is zero representation of the LGBT community. They're actually killed because of, just being themselves. And regarding women, there are a lot of rape cases. There's a large marital rape rate in Ghana. So that's something that they work to alleviate in their communities. Besides that, I think that girls are often not given access to education as boys are. So it's a norm for girls to drop out around, the age of 15, 16, stay at home, become wives to men who are much older than them. So there's also that issue of child marriage. So what happens in Ghana is that the US Embassy or the United Nations, they create these schools and safe havens which allow for girls and boys to just come get an education, participate in art activities and sports, to be given that holistic kind of educational experience because of those really high domestic abuse and domestic violence rates in Ghana. And I believe it's the same, and if not worse, in Nigeria and other parts of West Africa.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course you can. Do you mean for the Girl Up campaign that Anya and I are running? Because if so, yeah, definitely. We have an executive team that collaborates with us, but apart from that, we have an ambassador system where essentially you can promote the organization, and you also get information about the different initiatives we do and participating in those. For example, we're also going to be organizing a Model United Nations conference surrounding and focusing on gender equality with MUN impact. And we also have a bunch of initiatives aside from that. So of course, you can just go to our page and also DM us there. I think, Anya, we can also put our email in the chat, and you can always just send us an email to ask us about it. And we always post about any initiatives we're doing. So if you follow our page, then you'll be updated. So yeah, of course you can volunteer. That's the email, girluppakistanpk@gmail.com. I think let's wait 2 more minutes, see if anyone else has any other questions. And then if not, we can end there. Yeah, of course. You can send us a message, a direct message on the Instagram page, and then we'll reply to your message as soon as possible. You can also email us. Either is fine. We have a team also that's looking after that. So whatever questions you have or anything, we'll let you know.
Wait, hi. I have a question just overall, like after this. So as beyond these topics, what other topics do you think links heavily with gender equality and also sustainability and climate change, all of that?
For me personally, intersectionality is a huge part of everything related to equality, but especially in sustainability and climate change, because it's really an issue of rich versus poor as well. And then also, the fact that certain certain ethnic minorities and gender minorities are usually in poverty. Even women are usually in poverty as well. So they usually get the brunt of the consequences of climate change, whether that be through the different natural disasters, lack of access to clean water. They're usually also responsible for taking care of their communities, their children, and the elderly in their communities as well. So for me, it's definitely intersectionality. That's kind of like an overarching thing that brings together all of these issues of climate change and gender inequality and sustainability, and kind of acknowledging how identity and diversity impacts how we experience the consequences of these issues too.
Thank you.
No problem. I think that's all the questions. I don't see any others in the chat. If anyone wants to unmute, you can do so now, but otherwise I think we're done for now.
Yeah, I think we can start wrapping up. I'm not sure if the admin have anything to add.
Just we can thank the presenters for the wonderful session, and thank you for the participants for your active participation on Jamboard and also on code. So thank you, everyone. If you have any more questions, we still have a little bit of time, but if not, that's it for this session.
Thank you everyone for coming as well and participating actively. We really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks for coming. If you have any more questions or you forget to write down anything, the help desk will be available and you can always ask for their information. We'll be more than happy to help. Thank you again for this presentation. I'm sure some of the questions made you think twice about what you're doing and how to explain things, which is always good. So I'm going to close out the session just so if not, it's going to cut us out, and I think that'd be a lot more rude. So hope to see you again, hope to see you at the future sessions, or hope to see you at some other event. Thank you so much.